As university secretary, it was always my responsibility to bring order to a meeting. I am now calling this meeting to order.
I can see why.
Nobody's paying attention to me. The trustees didn't either.
Once this is over, let's connect. Okay, nice to meet you.
You can whistle, can't you?
Brenda.
Can you whistle?
Hey, Sue.
How are you doing? Oh, there she is. No. She will get order.
Brenda,
It's nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you.
Woo!
You're here.
The 50s.
Welcome back, everyone. Well, we're all buzzing and buzzing, and there's going to be, I think, a lot of time today for everybody to connect with one another. What a fabulous thing it is to look out and see you here. And as you look around the room, I know there are many, many people you want to connect with. I am so fortunate to be able to play a small role in introducing you and getting a conversation going with this next panel this morning. Three extraordinary women. I'm going to introduce them to you in just a moment, but first, my assignment is to tell you two things about the program. One is, I mentioned Dr. Happer earlier, Carolyn Murray Happer, who's sitting right back there. There will be tours of Women's Campus, but before that, this afternoon at 1:30, Dr. Happer is going to be giving a talk on past to present. Some of the things we've been touching on this morning, but she will take it deeper because she's done an extraordinary amount of research. I'm going to be there. I'm really looking forward to it, and I hope that everybody here who can come will be there. I think, is it the same place? Is it East Duke? What, the next building? Pink Parlor, thank you. Okay. The other thing I'm told to tell you is that we are continuing, Duke is continuing the StoryCorps project that was, I guess, took place yesterday in the middle of the day. They're making that available to everyone who would like to go. It's between 1:30 and 4 this afternoon. You can go at any time. They want to record your story. What was it like for you to be a young woman at Duke? How did you first hear about the university? And many of the same things we've talked about this morning and more. But they have a series of questions, and I think this is included in your packet. So think about just taking a few minutes and going and doing that. It would be a rich contribution to the StoryCorps, to the archives, to Duke's history. So I am incredibly honored to be a part of this next panel. As I said, three extraordinary individuals. You can read their bios in your packet here. They all are part of the same era that we were just discussing, although they're all a lot younger than I am. They graduated after I did. To my right, and I'm going to read so I get this exactly right. Brenda Armstrong was part of the class of 1970 at the Women's College. She is currently the Associate Dean of Medical Education at Duke's School of Medicine. She's also the Director of Admissions at the medical school. But Brenda has quite an amazing story to tell, and we're going to give her an opportunity to tell it in just a moment. Allison Haltom, class of 1972, and Allison, I'm going to make sure that I get this right. Allison was the secretary of Duke University, played a critical role in the administration of Duke for how many years, Allison?
Long time.
A long time. But she is part of the beating heart of this of Duke, and we're so pleased to have her as part of this conversation. And finally, Sue Wasiolek, who everybody recognizes, class of 1977. You came in 73, is that right?
Yeah, how did you know that?
Well, I have my sources. But what I should make this clear. Dr. Armstrong was the class of 1970 Women's College. Allison, class of 1972, last class to be part of Women's College, to live in Women's College. And Sue was the first class of women to be part of the unified system on West Campus. So, but Brenda, I want to start with you. We're going to talk about the experiences of their time. But Brenda, you tell us just quickly, I want to get a personal background from each one of you. Where did you grow up? How did you end up at Duke?
Well, I'm from Eastern North Carolina, from Rocky Mount. At the time that I came to Duke, I came from a segregated educational system in Rocky Mount, one that was very difficult for us in that there were tremendous restrictions on the resources that could have been made available to us. Good example was that our teachers in math were forbidden from teaching us trigonometry and calculus because there was the perception that we would go no further than high school. So instead of losing their jobs because they did it, we had class on Saturday mornings. We did that for any number of what now would have been considered AP courses. I was fortunate because my parents, both of whom were second generation African American college graduates, that was unheard of at the time, were adamant that I was going to have the best education possible. I was also relatively young. I was 15, looking at coming to college, and my parents didn't want me to go very far. They just said, you're not going to Michigan, you're not going up to what was then Radcliffe, you're not going any further than we can drive to see you. So that, and my father and mother were educationally at a place where they thought that the University of North Carolina and North Carolina State were beneath me. So that left Duke. And so I came to Duke in the third class of African Americans. And since she is sitting in the audience, I will tell you that my heroine, Shiro is what my mother called her, when I got here after that first year was Mimi Rubin Cook.
It's right there. Mimi.
Well, I too am from North Carolina, but Brenda was from a big town compared to my town. I was from a small town in North Carolina. I was the first person from my high school to apply to Duke. And the folks in Denton, North Carolina knew about Duke because we received the local paper, in a sense, was the Greensboro Daily News, and they covered Duke, especially the Vigil. It made front page headlines for a while, so I was going to this liberal place. They didn't know Ivy League, but they did know Duke, and they thought I was going somewhere, you know, to another planet, I think is what. And they thought, you know, the term damn Yankees, okay. I do have to tell you, sitting here next to Brenda, the only diversity that I knew growing up were that some people were Methodist and some were Baptist. True. And I was so glad that I was not a Baptist because they stayed in church a lot longer than us Methodists did. I had been like everyone else, you know, I'd been #1 in my high school. I had been very successful. I came to Duke, and I quickly found out that being #1 in Denton, North Carolina was a long way from being #1 at Duke, not even in the top 10%. I will talk, I don't want to go into much details about this now, but if it had not been for some wonderful women in my dorm who mentored, supported me, I would have left Duke. And I'm proud to say that I stuck it out, and I owe a lot to them. I also owe a lot to my father, who did not have the opportunity to go to college, but instilled in me at a very, very early age that I should go to any place and the best place to which I can be accepted. And I think there's going to be some parental themes coming along here too. So,
Sue. Thank you. I'm very uncomfortable talking about my own Duke experience. It's not something that I think about a lot. This panel has really forced me to reflect on it in a way that I've never really had to do before. I feel much, much more comfortable talking about Duke students of the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s and the Duke experience and what I think Duke student life is all about today. But for me to talk about myself is really making me a little bit nervous. But I will do what I can to remember what it was like. I grew up in North Carolina. My family is originally from New Jersey. I was first generation in college. And like Allison reflected on her mother and Brenda on her parents. In my mother's high school yearbook, she said that her goal in life was to be a well-educated person. She went on to, quote, business college, which back then was, I guess, more like secretarial school. And my dad got kicked out of the 8th grade by the nuns for misbehavior. So nonetheless, both of my parents expected that I would go on to college, and that's about the only role they played in me coming to Duke. I did go to public high school and all through public school in Charlotte, and had some great teachers and a wonderful guidance counselor who suggested some schools that I might apply to. I applied to UNC, to UNCG, which at the time was really the place that women in North Carolina went, because if you went there, you might get the Catherine Smith Reynolds Scholarship, which was comparable, supposedly, to the Moorhead at UNC. Women were not eligible for the Moorhead at UNC at the time. I also applied to North Carolina State, and God only knows why, but I applied to Catholic University of America and St. John's in Jamaica, New York. Don't ask me why. I awaited responses from my applications, and to make a long story short, I got some good scholarships to the state schools, but I got a financial aid package to Duke that my guidance counselor said I really ought not turn down. It would require me to pay back a lot of loans. It would require me to have extensive work-study jobs, but it would be that Duke education that would set me apart in the long run. And so I trusted her. I accepted the admission here without ever seeing the campus, even though I lived 3 hours away. That was a very long trip for my family to make. We never made it. And my parents did eventually come visit, but that's how I got here. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later.
And I was thoughtless. I didn't tell you what Sue's title is. I assume everybody knows, Assistant Vice President for Student Affairs and Dean of Students. So Sue, as I say, has been a huge part of the life of this university. We owe so much to you. Sue. Brenda, you talked about, the decision to come here, how your parents didn't want you to go very far away. When you got here, you talked a little bit to us about this on the telephone the other day. What was it like? What was it like for you? There were how many? You were the third African-American woman accepted or admitted at Duke. Accepted.
Well, I was in the third class.
In the third class, I'm sorry. And so, what was it like in the fall of 1966?
It was very, very different. I went to a school where all of my classmates were African Americans, and I went to a school where we had transmitted to us the notion that we were the vanguard, that we would be change agents, and that to do that we had to have a superior education. And in the process of that happening, we also were transmitted our own history, which was really important to me when I got here, because there was no institutional memory of any contribution to African Americans to Duke. The fact that Julian Abel was the architect who conceived of this magnificent university was not part of what was available to all students. The fact that the Bassett affair had occurred was not available to all students. And especially for those of us who were African American, the reminders of where we came from and who we were the people who worked at Duke. And they were the people who saved us. They saved me because I didn't have a way to get off campus except to get on a bus, and my father had strictly forbidden me to do that. I didn't have the faculty role models that the majority of students had. They just took it for granted. They had it. I had Mimi to emulate, and she was such a superior academic student that it set a bar very high for all of us. But I felt socially isolated. In my dormitory, I was offended the first week of undergraduate school when someone called the woman who was the receptionist in my dorm, who was 40 plus, by her first name. And she was the same age as me. And I thought that was extraordinarily disrespectful. And I came from a group of parents and relatives who said, when you're disrespected, you speak up. So I did. And that called a house meeting so we could discuss that. It was what my mom used to call the teachable moment. And everybody knew that the person who sat at that desk, who helped them every day, had a family, was an adult who was as old as most of their mothers or grandmothers, and was to be respected. For that, my roommate and I got a swastika painted on our door. And the recounting of the numbers of episodes where the clash of not just race, but class was present, it was all the time. So my days at Duke, I think we had this conversation. My days at Duke were defined by race first. And as a gender issue, I had gotten it already. I had a mother who was a few hours short of a PhD in English literature from Columbia. And she, in our community, led a lot of the political activism that allowed us to begin to look at voter registration when it became available. Who thought that it was important that her daughter stepped with her everywhere she went. There was a political statement in our community. So I knew who to be as a woman. And I was surprised a little bit that that was different. It made me stand out. But nonetheless, I had that coming. What I didn't have was how to deal with the intensity of both the obligate racism and the stuff that just happened because people didn't know any better. And so one of my obligations as a student was, at every point that it became an issue, or at least I felt offended, I felt that I should say something, which is the same way as I felt as a woman. And I got that transmitted to me by this wonderful, regal, highly educated woman who raised me. So my job, and she was very clear when she let me go to Duke, and she said it, I let you go to Duke. My job was to take that legacy that they had delivered to me over and over again, so I wouldn't forget it, to take that legacy to the next step. And so on that morning when we took over the Allen building and I called them to tell them what had happened, it was my dad who was just, he was crazy. He was like, I'm coming to get you now. I was like, you can't get me now because I'm in a building and there's some police here. So that's the first thing. But my mother got on the phone and she said, you go, girl. You are your mom's daughter. And so Duke has been a place for me to, I want to say grow up and grow through. I grew through the racism to see that I needed to be that change agent that my mom and dad had prepared me to be. And although I went away for 5 years, I went to medical school in St. Louis. I could not have gone to medical school here because the Allen building was too close. But I went to medical school in St. Louis and then went out to UCLA. And when I came back, I knew that there was some unfinished business. And I have built my career in terms of giving back to Duke in a way that it may not have expected me to give back, but to give back in a way that has made, I hope, this institution a much more powerful, a much more broadly based in its thinking about issues of gender, race, sexual preference, religious preference, geography, socioeconomic status, of making us as a university that will achieve greatness because we embrace all of those things.
Powerful. Brenda, thank you for telling your story. Just hearing the story, I know, leaves everyone in awe of what, you know, of your experience going through what you did. I mean, we can only imagine what it was like on campuses across the country, but hearing it from what you were thinking and feeling and what your parents were saying, I think really does drive it home. These are big issues and that we're talking about this morning. So race for you was defining. Allison, you came along in the fall of '68, so 2 years after Brenda entered Duke. For you, what shaped your experience at the Women's College?
I want to just comment. I'm hearing Brenda makes me realize that I attended a Duke that was very different than the one that she attended. And it had nothing to do with anything except the color of our skins. And I was, in many respects, I was too scared academically and socially to be out there in front on anything. You know, I spent my first 2 years at Duke catching up and keeping up. And in some respects, that was both academic and social, that I felt that I had to get to a different place than where I came here from. The Vietnam War was probably the defining issue for me at Duke. Whether it was because I was a political science major, whether it was because a young man from my high school was killed in the war that he didn't want to be in. You know, the draft. I find it very hard today to understand why there is not more outrage about the wars that we have been in over the last decade. And I can tell you why it is. It's because of the draft. There is not, you know, the folks who are being drafted do not, or the folks who are enlisting are not in the social economic strata that the folks who were being drafted in the 70s were, and all of a sudden it became an issue. So that became a defining issue for me. I laugh about this. When I applied to Duke, I wrote my essay on the lack of patriotism in the United States. I thought that was probably what the admissions committee wanted to hear.
It worked.
And after Kent State, I was out campaigning against ending the war and arguing with, not arguing, debating with my uncle on our back porch about why we should get out of the war. And I did it in an educated and articulate way. And my father said afterwards, he said, "You'll never change his mind, but I'm proud of what you did." So.
Well, by 1973, the United States was basically out of the war. It was somewhat of a memory on this campus, and for those of you in the audience who were here in the early 70s, I'd love to hear if you had a different impression of that. What was important to students at the time that I was here was probably more related to streaking. We had a fully organized and orchestrated streak down West Campus and over to the nursing school on a Saturday night, and it was extremely well orchestrated. It was one of the most frightening moments for me of my undergraduate career. I had never seen that many naked men. And frankly, I had never seen that many naked women. So it was an eye-opener for me. And I don't remember, frankly, a lot about my undergraduate career, but I vividly remember running down the quad, fully clothed, trying to get back to my own dorm room because I was just so frightened by all these naked people. So, my undergraduate experience for me personally was frankly defined by finances and the lack thereof. I struggled. I didn't know if I was going to make it from one day to the next. I had a ledger that I kept of money that I owed to friends. And every time I got a paycheck from a work-study job, I would pay off the people who I had the latest or the longest debt with, and then I would just work down the list. So frankly, I was so grateful for people who would loan me a couple dollars here and there just to keep me going from check to check. I was a poor student. As Allison said, I struggled academically, I struggled socially, and the only thing that saved me was my residential living experience. It was a place that saved me. I will just tell you, I got in a huge argument in the 80s with Paula Berger. She was just really defending the women's college, and I was like, Paula, you're crazy. That was just the dumbest model. How could you ever want to defend the women's college? What we have on West Campus now, where the women are living next door to the men, still in an all-women's residence hall. There was only one co-ed residence hall at the time that I can recall. But we're still living together, but we're living next door to the men. It's great. It's kind of like a brother-sister relationship. I'm here to tell you publicly today, I get it now. I get it. And I understand what the women's college was. I had a little piece of it in the residence hall in which I lived in on West Campus, but Judy, it saved me. I don't know what I would have done without that place to go home to at the end of some very, very difficult days, just for me personally. I don't think Duke was struggling at the time institutionally. I think Duke was sort of finding its place. We were moving, frankly, from a regional institution to a national one. I think the students on campus were thriving in many ways. The war was over. But for me, it was just, how am I going to get through this? And I do want to say this, and then I don't care if I say another thing. And that is, I was going to medical school. I didn't get in. My mother always told me, you got to marry a doctor. And I said, why marry one when you can be one? But I didn't become one, and thank God I didn't. The person that I think about who was most important for me in that residence hall was my RA. She was a PhD graduate student. She was a remarkable woman, and she was somebody I could go to all the time. And it was just this morning, listening to all of you talk and hearing Judy and Cindy talk, that I was remembering that RA, and I think that's probably why I'm doing what I'm doing today in education. I think she was my role model. I didn't have any medical role models, really. But I think back to everything that I've experienced here, and I think the reason I'm doing what I'm doing today is because of the struggles that I had as an undergrad. Because I know we still have students who struggle today, whether it's for personal reasons, financial reasons, mental health reasons, whatever the case might be, not fitting in because of race, because of socioeconomic issues, because of gender, whatever it is, I really feel like I want Duke to be a place where folks feel that sense of belonging and feel that they fit in and that they have a role and they have a place. And it hasn't ended. There are still those students who don't feel that they belong. But I will be eternally indebted to this institution for giving me this opportunity.
Well, and you're perfect in that role.
I don't know about that, but thank you.
Well,
Judy, could I add something about the residential life experience, because that was key to me when I talk about the mentors and everything. That was just part of what kept me together. We've all kind of laughed over the past day and a half about curfews and things. One of the things that happened when we all came in or had to be in at the same time were these wonderful hallway conversations. I can remember sitting on the floors in Allspa talking with, and we might be talking about dates for a while, but we would go on and talk about world issues. And there was a lot that went on in those hallways about mentoring and caring about one another. And if you had come in and you'd had a bad date, whatever bad date meant, there were people there who would kind of come around you, older and upperclassmen and everything. So I just want to kind of say that I think when we dissolved, merged, whatever we did to Women's College, and we did it in the advancement of things, there were some things, especially on the residential end, that were really lost for women. And I don't know if we can ever, I know there's a lot going on, and with a new model and everything, hopefully there will be less of the students moving around like nomads.
You're saying the constancy of
the
being able to stay in one place and have those relationships.
Yes.
Brenda, did you stay in, you were in Bassett, right? Did you stay there all 4 years at Duke?
I was there for 4 years. So
when you had an issues in your life, whom did you, I mean, you said your roommate was someone with whom you were close, is that right? There were upper class people. Whom did you reach out to? Who was important on campus?
Well, you know, the interesting thing is that my experience with East Campus was that there weren't that many of us who were African American women, but there were enough, and we were so close. And so I would either call them and say, you know, this is happening. There are some social stories that I could regale you with of how we had this network of women. It was just very powerful. There were people in the dorm who stepped across whatever their reservations they thought of race especially and befriended us. And they were the go-to people in the middle of the night. When Martin Luther King was assassinated, I can remember to this day exactly what I was doing. I was sitting on the floor in my dormitory, and one of the other African-American women, Alexis Smith, came and she said, Martin Luther King has been killed. And we felt this incredible urge to go to everybody in the dormitory, knock on that door and say, we need your help. We didn't say we're mad. We said, we need your help. And so there was this spontaneous house meeting for everybody to allow us to cry. It's tough because I hadn't thought about that until you asked me. The night that we were over on West Campus and, you know, the tear gas and stuff started and everybody was looking for everybody, it was my dorm who came to find me. My dorm. And they were like, we were so worried. And they might not have agreed why we went into the building, but they were worried. Those were the defining moments of East Campus for me. I'm so grateful that I got out of Duke before we changed. And then we had, in the first years, I had Mimi. And she was like truly an icon to those of us because she was so smart and she was always gracious. And if there was something really bugging me, I could go over and knock on the dorm door and ask to speak to her. And so it was ironic. Weren't you in Giles? That's right. I was the faculty in residence for 6 years at Giles. I had 119 children. And I took it as that experience. I know Sue doesn't want to hear that, but I took it as the bridge experience to deliver a group of very raw undergraduates to be ready to be adults when they moved off of East Campus. And it was my experience in Bassett where we had this wonderful, diverse group of women who delivered me, ironically, to the point of being able to do some things that I didn't think I could do, I knew I needed to do. But it was that group of women who never knew how powerful just the fact that they started that process of accepting me and my roommate for how different we were, how different our lives were, but how nonetheless we deserved to be part of the fabric of Duke. I translated that to that 6 years as faculty in residence. And to this day, I am so grateful for having had that experience because in working with students, it helps me understand where they're coming from and how they're trying to find their own way and what my role is in helping facilitate that process, but letting them do it themselves.
Thank you for sharing what is an acutely personal moment for you, Brenda.
Thanks.
Thank you. I want to ask Sue and Allison and then open it up to everybody to share your experiences or to ask questions. You both touched on this, but to whom did you turn when it was a tough moment? I mean, Allison, you talked about gathering together in the hallway. Were there upper class people? Were there faculty who were particularly meaningful for you?
I would say that my FAC helped to get me through my freshman year. Sherry Smith, I don't know whether any of you knew her. She was bubbly and smart and able to see through all the crap sometimes and say, you know, you're gonna make it. You just, you know, you're gonna be fine. But it may take you this year and maybe part of next year, but you're gonna be okay. And there were many nights that I spent crying in her room saying, you know, I want to go home. And she said, no, you don't need it. You really don't. And she gave me the courage to stay, and I will always be indebted to her.
It was not my FAC. I had a lousy one. And that motivated me to apply to become one later on, which I'm sure has motivated a number of us to do those kinds of things. But it was primarily the other women in the residence hall and the RA. I did have two female...
The RA was your class? Or
no, she was a graduate student.
Oh, that's
she was
right.
a graduate student. And the other thing, I did have two female professors while I was at Duke. I didn't have their classes until later on. They were both in the education department. And I was thinking when preparing for this panel, there are sort of two major changes that have occurred at Duke since the 70s and I wonder what role these changes play just in gender overall. And one is we don't have the School of Nursing. and today as we did back in the 70s.
Right.
In 1982, I guess, the School of Nursing ended. And that, I don't know if we have any School of Nursing grads in the audience, but that played a role for me as an undergrad, but more as a graduate student, because I ended up being an RA in Haynes House. So that gave me a little different experience. And the other was the Department of Education, which is where there were a number of female faculty members. So.
I want to open it up to all of you. Each one of you brings a rich set of stories of your own. So perhaps there's something you've heard or something you want to get off your chest. This is your chance.
Can I, before you say something,
yeah.
I just want to say one more real quick thing. There was a comment made yesterday that also reminded me of something in the 70s, and that is one of the things that, the phrase that was used a lot when I was at Duke was, you don't want to just be a stay-at-home mom. And I will tell you that phrase endured, frankly, through the 80s on this campus. And I was very pleased in the 90s when women were very proud to say that they were moms and that they were full-time moms, because I think that's probably one of the most important professions one can have as a woman. So,
no doubt about it. Yes. Do you mind standing so all of us can hear you, since we don't have a mic, I guess? Thank you.
I'm Jean Hart. I'm from the class of 1961, and I'm hearing people from the 40s. My mother was here in the 30s, and our daughter was here in the 80s. But 1961 was the cusp of a bridge between the old Duke and the new decade that just roiled everything, and your experiences there in the 70s. I'm hearing this nostalgia that I certainly feel for the Women's College and what that meant to us and how much has anybody analyzed what we lost? If we should have done that maybe at the time, but is that still the model that we need to be in now? I just want to know how we are doing. Are the students that are here happy with the way that life is doing, that they're the nurturing that we received and had from each other?
there's a hand up.
I was wondering how we
I think the one there is trying to answer that. The one with the hand on.
Could you stand up? Thank you.
I have a daughter who's a freshman in GA. I also entered Bassett when you were our hero in 1969. I dropped out. I later became the editor of the Chronicle 75-76, and I had my daughter at 22. So she's now over in Milford Avenue. And I had a lot of the same concerns you did. They're very happy over there. But one of the things that concerns me is what happens, and this is why I think you're changing the living model, when they leave this wonderful cloistered, warm and pleasant environment with all the freshmen together. She's with men, she's with women. Brenda, one of the stories I'd like to tell you about stereotypes is one of her very good friends is a Nigerian, educated in South Africa, highly educated. She wrote a powerful essay that my daughter sent me last night for an African journal about a comment she got into. You're a fake African. And it was a very powerful essay about stereotypes about what Africans should be like. She's a modern kid. So I think that's a whole kind of turnaround of stereotypes. But I had this very conversation after StoryCorps yesterday with a woman from the class of 2012 about the self-confidence of Duke women, because you still hear that they worry about self-esteem and kind of issues of sexuality and you know, things we see on campus that certainly during my era and in this era, we wouldn't go to But my concern is that when they get away from this wonderful first-year experience and move over to whatever the living situation is, somehow that self-confidence erodes, and there's this pressure even worse on women because of these stereotypes for period about pre-flight and all of this. You know, to be perfect in ways that are just really not quite possible and not fair. So it's a little bit of a, you know.
Sue, I want to ask Sue to comment on this because you're part of the administration now.
I mean, and I could go on for hours to talk about this, but the students have made it very clear to us that East Campus, the way that we currently have it configured, works. They enjoy that first-year experience. They want us to keep it that way. There's no plan to really change that. We continue to want to enhance it from a programmatic standpoint and whatever, but I think they feel as though it very well prepares them to move on to the rest of their Duke experience. What I think we have discovered is that the residential model that has been created on West Campus and Central Campus, at least to date, has probably not been as good as it could be. And hence we're sort of moving back to a house model. It will never be exactly the way that it was for a whole host of reasons. But the new house model, as we call it, is really trying to go back to what we've all talked about, that stability, the continuity, and the ability to continue to have that ongoing sense of community in that one place, so that you feel as though you are grounded and that you belong and that you don't lead the life of a nomad moving from residence hall to residence hall. Again, we're starting that new model next year. It will be a work in progress, I would say, for 3 to 5, even 7 years. I hope folks will be patient with us and give us a chance to really make it grow and work and progress in the way that we want it to. But that is our goal, is to return to that stability and continuity and sense of community and equity as well, so that everyone has that equal opportunity.
Who else out there has a thought? Yes.
I'm the one that married a doctor.
My mother would congratulate you.
But I did meet him in 6th grade.
So could you stand up? We want to hear you. Stand up. Yeah.
I'm Judy Woodruff. I was Judy White back in the early 70s. I graduated in 74. I did meet my husband in 6th grade. He wanted to be a dentist then, so I think it's okay. I just wanted to say that my sounding boards, because my husband and I did both come to Duke, and my sounding boards were obviously not my hallmates. I did live in 3 different dorms on East Campus, so I was a nomad, but still on East Campus. But my sounding boards are here today, and Helen and Barb Hicks Teagarden. And I'm thankful for my roommates and my hallmates. But we have both stayed connected through the years and reconnected even more as we've gotten to these ages and been brought together by events like this. And I want to say thank you for that. And I also want to say that I also have done everything from teaching to lots and lots of coaching to being a stay-at-home mom. And I want to say it's all great, too. It's all great. It's great to be at home, and it's great to be with your kids and be a part of that whole process. And it gave me the opportunity to do all kinds of wonderful volunteer teaching and coaching. And I'm just so thankful for that. I'm thankful for the connections that my husband has had here at Duke with all of you. Brenda had my son in her grasp as he went through medical school, business school here at Duke. He just graduated last year and is now out in the world himself. And Dean Sue managed to get both of my kids through the Duke education, or the Duke residential experience and social experience. And I'm just incredibly thankful. And that's all I'm standing up to say. I'm thankful for all of the women activists who created an environment that has allowed my daughter to play 4 years of soccer at Duke and to have all kinds of neat clothes. I'm teasing. But although she did want to have gear, that was one of her goals. She wanted good gear. But the experience naked, but I was there watching.
I bet you were naked.
But I'm just really thankful to all of those people that created an environment for me and for all of the athletes, and then beyond that, all the activists that created a great environment for all the women to witness what we're witnessing here today. And I'm thankful for everybody that made all this happen, that we could be here and experience it. So sorry for the blurt, but I'm thankful.
Said very, very well. Margaret Taylor Smith.
I don't want to talk about the 70s. I'm the class of 47. And there are probably not very many of us here today that go back that far. But I want to talk about something that Brenda talked about. And Brenda, you and Judy are probably the only ones who know where Roanoke Rapids, North Carolina is.
I do. Oh, no, we all do.
That's right.
It's my hometown. All right?
Go there every month to do a clinic.
I came to Duke in 1943. I want to talk about the fact that when I came here, all white women, and as I look around the campus today, it looks like the world around us. It looks like the world around us. I'm not at all certain that it looks like the world around us at some of the higher levels. We're getting there, but we're not there yet. But I want to share a story with you about our own children, of whom we have 4. Our first child, a daughter, married a former Roman Catholic priest. All right? Haven't done anything yet.
Former is the operative word.
He was released from his vows just a month before they were married by the good Pope John. So today, they have had a wonderful marriage, have 2 adult children, and 4 grandchildren of their own. They've had a very happy marriage, which I might not have expected. Next child, a Duke graduate, his son, was married and divorced after 18 months. His wife left him for another Duke student. And then he began living with and finally married a woman who was 9 years his senior, who had been married before and had 4 children of that marriage, and she was an African American. Well, this little girl from the South, you can imagine what my thoughts were at that time. I'm happy to report that they've had a very successful marriage, and they have 1 child who was very dyslexic, but has an undergraduate and a graduate degree and is now working with handicapped children.
Wow.
Our 2 younger ones were more normal. One of them was sitting beside me, Amy, who's an attorney, and we have a granddaughter here who's a sophomore. We have 3 generations here this weekend. But I just wanted to tell you that if you have children who are happy, productive, independent, good citizens, as a parent, you have done something that was awfully right. And finally, the paradox is that I made such a fuss about our children married whom they married, that it was not until Amy's youngest boy was born. She called me one day and she said, "Mom, the doctor says that Sean Patrick O'Connor has the sickle cell trait." But that can't be true. They did the test again. He has the sickle cell trait. I have it, Amy has it, and all her children have it. And this is the most interesting thing. At the time, I was on the board of a hospital in Detroit. As a matter of fact, I was the chair of the visitors at the medical school, Wayne State University Medical School. You probably know it. And his name was Dr. Charles Whitten.
I knew him.
Did you know
I knew him. He and my dad were very good friends.
Terrific guy. He said, "Margaret, I have a funny story to tell you." I shared with him the fact that I had the trait. And he said, "We were doing research in Atlanta, Georgia, and we had to stop the research temporarily because there were so many people who had the trait. And they didn't want it to be known. So I just want to suggest to you that you should embrace change, responsible change. And it's a very exciting thing. And also, I learned that as a parent, I have given our children permission to make the choices that they make. And they turned out to be responsible choices. And I just wanted to share that with you, which is something totally different than the other stories. I've got a lot of others, but I won't share.
Always words of wisdom from Margaret Taylor Smith. It's 10:15. This panel is supposed to end. I think Brenda has an appointment right after this, so we are going to conclude. But I just want to thank everybody for being here, and especially let's give these amazing women.